WC TBA celebrating 15 years of leadership.
The electorate may have two views about the government's ability to speed up growth and slow down inflation. But India's central statistics body has achieved both these goals with some great mathematics. 2 weeks back, the CSO, the Central Statistical Office, changed the base year to calculate the real GDP. What does that mean? If India produced 100 goods costing 10 rupees each in 2010, its GDP would have been 100 into 10, 1000 rupees. In 2015, if India produces 120 of the same good but priced at 15 rupees because of inflation, its GDP will sound like 120 into 15, 1800 rupees. That is a growth of 80% in 5 years. But really, the country's GDP has actually grown only 20% because it produced only 20% more goods. However, an inflation of 50% made the GDP look like 80% better. So, economists calculate the total output or GDP in any year and then deflate it, remove the inflation impact to a chosen base year to get the real growth picture. India's Central Statistical Office 2 weeks back shifted the base year from 2004-05 to 2011-12. The base year is shifted also because consumption trends change. People consume newer items like cell phones and LED bulbs. Also, as time passes, they spend less and less on food, more and more on high-value goods, and sometimes more on services like tourism or a spa or in a salon. While incorporating these changes, the Central Office made other changes to bring the statistics to global standards. It calculated GDP according to market prices, not the earlier factor cost, which means it measured GDP not according to what it cost the producer to produce, but according to the price the consumer paid for the goods, which is MRP plus taxes but minus subsidies. Thirdly, the CSO also found that it had better data on corporate India from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. This is data on 5 lakh companies. Hitherto, the CSO only had data on some 2,500 large companies, which it extrapolated to the whole manufacturing sector. The result of all these changes was quite dramatic. India's GDP shot up from 5.1% in FY14 in the earlier base to 6.9% in the new base. And the GDP for the current year, which was widely expected to be 5.5% in the old series, has come in at 7.5% in the new series. Everyone, from the Chief Economic Advisor to the RBI Governor, was shocked at this high growth when actually bank credit growth and car sales all show very poor growth. The Central Statistical Office explains this anomaly by saying growth is only partly on account of volume but partly on account of value addition. That is, the country may have produced only 2% more cars in FY15 over FY14, but if it produced a car with 10% fewer resources, the percentage of value added is higher. That is, in FY14, it produced 10 rupees worth of goods from 5 rupees of resources, making a value addition of 5 rupees. But in FY15, the same resources cost only 2 rupees, and the country made 9 rupees worth of goods. Volume of output is down, but value addition is 9 minus 2, 7 rupees, which is higher than in FY14. This week, the CSO also rebased the consumer inflation data from 2010 base year to 2012 base year. It also changed the importance given to various items in the inflation index depending on changes in consumer preferences as revealed in the CSO's consumer survey. Here's how the weights changed. Weights for food fell from 47.58% to 45.86%. Weights for fuel and light fell from 9.49% to 6.84%. On the other hand, weights for clothing and footwear rose from 4.7% to 6.5%. Weights for housing rose from 9.7 to 10.07%, and weights for services rose from 26.3 to 28.3%. Economists are still squabbling slightly over the small impact of the changes in the inflation index and agreeing vehemently over the big upgrade brought to the GDP by the new series. To clarify some of the issues, I have with me the author of this grand exercise, TCA Anant, the Chief Statistician of the country and the head of the Central Statistical Office. Professor Anant, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let me try and assess the difference between the two series of consumer inflation. If you can tell us what is the average CPI for 2014 according to the new series and the old series.
Look, no, I'm not. I'm sure it's there, but I don't think I've calculated it. I didn't recall reading it in any of the things. But approximately, I can give you an approximate answer. Approximate answer is about 0.5% difference between the old series calculations and the new series calculations at any given point, largely on account of two factors: changes in the weighting diagram, which is a smaller element, and changes in one element in the calculation technique of using geometric mean to arithmetic mean. The average difference is about 0.5%. But it varies on in different months. There's some months are slightly higher, some months are slightly lower.
Okay, if the total impact of both weights and geometric mean is 0.5%, what exactly is the impact of just using geometric mean instead of arithmetic mean?
Look, I told you the total is about 0.5% or maybe 0.6, 0.7, of which the weight shifts would be about 0.1 of thereabouts, 0.1 or 0.2, geometric mean would be about the rest. That's the orders of magnitude.
Fair enough, sir. Okay, let me come to another issue. Why did you choose 2011-12 as the base year? This is for the GDP. Some may argue that actually it wasn't quite a normal year.
Well, Latha, there is a problem of when you choose the year, you have to remember you have to choose it pretty close to the time when the year is still in progress. Let me explain what were the criteria. The basic recommendation is that GDP series, the base should be revised frequently and in approximately once every 5 years. As per this recommendation, we should have been trying to revise GDP in 9-10. Now, when the year 9-10 issue was being discussed, the feeling was this was the year immediately following the crisis. I don't know if you recall the details and so on. Now, in that sense, the feeling was that this may not be appropriate, and that year was also marked with a very large agricultural crisis in terms of failure of rains. For both of these reasons, they felt they wanted to defer it. Now, deferring it is a complex thing, because then we have to schedule a number of activities in advance. So we were able to schedule a household consumer expenditure and employment survey, which is a very important element in GDP calculations for 11-12.
Yeah.
In fact, when people saw the 11-12 consumer expenditure survey, lots of people were asking me, why did you do a poverty calculation again so quickly? Now, the answer is, and these things have to be planned in advance and executed. So once, and they're expensive exercises, so once they've been done, the base year would go to 11-12. Now, in a sense, the impact of the crisis by some arguments continues. And would we therefore, we can't defer GDP base revision for so long, because then the underlying estimates become more and more unreliable.
Okay, can you detect any peculiarities about 11-12 itself that economists and analysts ought to be aware of?
No, I don't know what the look, insofar as what are the underlying peculiarities of the year, it's very hard for me to say at the moment, but let me try to take a stab. If you took at 11-12, for example, you will find that international commodity prices were about at the peak during 11-12 and subsequently started crashing. Now, that would have, of course, affected domestic value added. In part, we may have had a situation where domestic value added in 11-12 may have been depressed because our inputs were being expensive, at least the imported inputs would have been expensive, and our domestic prices to some extent in some cases were being regulated or not rising as fast. There were a phase when that may have happened. So how did 11-12 factor in? These are things which analysts will have to look at very carefully. As a statistician, what I can say is that the new GDP series captures underlying value added better than the older series.
All right. Well, your nominal growth for FY14 and for FY15 are similar to the old series, 113 lakh crore and about 126 lakh crore. But there is a big difference in the real rate of growth. Clearly, your deflator is making a big difference. Now, some economists I spoke to worry that you have probably used the WPI, the Wholesale Price Index, to deflate the services entries, and that is why you are getting an exaggerated deflator. We actually we use WPI and CPI both in different segments. Okay.
But the difference is the weighting structure of different segments has changed, and the rise in manufacturing, which is almost exclusively deflated by WPI, has meant that the overall deflator has fallen. So you have to rework the calculations using the changes in weights, and you'll find a large part of the explanation lies there.
No, but I'm speaking about services. CPI also has services like education, medical, transportation. Did you use CPI deflators there?
Look, which index gets deflated with which is a matter of detail, and you'll have to go through the entire. They have a classification categories where they look at you, and you'll see what the appropriate deflator is. But services, to the extent that they relate to trade, construction, it's not clear that the deflator should be CPI.
So, do I understand you right? You deflated probably transportation, education and medical and such services with consumer price inflation, CPI, and trade and such services with the WPI.
Fair enough. No, transport, not sure. Personal services, yes. Government administration, yes. So, that's why I'm saying that I would much rather that you looked at the compositional structure, the change in weights, and then work it out. You'll get, it's a derived answer.
So, no, I just want to clarify. You deflated some parts of services with WPI and some parts using CPI?
As was done in the past. In that there is no change. I mean, we used to earlier also deflate trade and certain elements with WPI.
Okay. I'm just trying to find out why there was such a big difference, therefore, in the deflator. In any case, Professor Anant, we need to take a break at this juncture. We will continue this conversation after a very short break. Many more questions for the Chief Statistician.
CNBC TV 18, celebrating 15 years of leadership.